again and welcome to our continuing journey on the ICH GCPs. And this is session 4. Let's start with Independent Ethics Committee. That's an IEC, and it is defined as an independent body. It could be a review board, it could be an institutional committee, it could be regional, it could be national, it could be supernatural, and it's constituted of medical professionals and non-medical members whose responsibility it is to ensure the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects in a trial, and to provide public assurance of that protection by, amongst other things, reviewing and approving, providing favorable opinion on the trial protocol, the suitability of the investigators' facilities, and the methods and materials to be used in obtaining and documenting informed consent of the trial subjects. The IEC, or the IRB, is an oversight committee for clinical research sites. That's their role. They ensure that you have the right documents to conduct the trial. They review the protocols and all the trial-related material to ensure that the clinical research sites plan to adhere to the protocol and all the regulatory requirements. The other thing is that there are certain submissions that have to be done to them on an ongoing basis. So IEC, IRBs are over clinical research sites. They're that oversight committee. The informed consent process is integral to clinical trials, right? Because we are making sure that before a patient participates, they understand all aspects of it. So this is a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed of all aspects of the trial that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. Informed consent is documented by means of a written, signed, and dated informed consent. Now, we also have e-consents, which are done electronically, but just a patient who's participating in a clinical trial has to be safe, and this is the gateway for participation. If you cannot get this process right, which means that if you mess up the informed consent process, then it's really very difficult to actually conduct a trial properly, because you want to make sure that the patient understands what they are being involved in. No procedures are conducted before this document is signed and dated and provided back to the clinical research site. And however it's captured, whether it's on paper or it's on e-consent, many clinical research sites would have the patient take the document home. They can send it to them via email or however it plans, so that they really understand it. And then the investigator has to further explain to the patient, has to be available to answer questions. But another piece is how this process is documented. So you obtain the informed consent, but how do you document it? Many sites have standard operating procedures for this. They make sure that there is an SOP which says this is how we obtain our informed consent, this is how it's documented, and these are the time points. So this is extremely important, and you really want to get this right. Inspection. This is something that is done by a regulatory authority. So it's the act by a regulatory authority of conducting an official review of documents, facilities, records, and any other resources that are deemed by the authorities to be related to the clinical trial that may be located at the site of the trial, at the sponsor, or at the CRO's facilities, or any other establishment deemed appropriate by regulatory authorities. Inspections are typically done by the regulatory authority. In the US is the FDA, and they can inspect clinical research sites. They can inspect the sponsor. So sponsors do have audits or inspections. They can inspect the institutional review board. They can inspect the CRO, vendors involved with the clinical trial. However, it could be based on a finding. Maybe an issue came up, somebody said something, or it could just be something that they do periodically. So this is interwoven into the conduct of clinical trials. Institution, medical. So this, any public or private entity or agency, medical, dental, or clinical trials are conducted. These are clinical research sites, basically. It could be one that has satellite sites, but it's an institution where clinical trials are being conducted. An IRB is the same thing like an IEC. It's an independent body constituted of medical, scientific, and non-scientific members whose responsibility is to ensure the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects involved in a trial by, amongst other things, reviewing, approving, and providing continual review of trial protocols and amendments, and of the methods and materials used to obtain and document informed consent of trial subjects. The definitions only vary because IRBs tend to be more in the US and in South America, and in many other countries they're called an independent ethics committee. So it is the same committee, the same oversight that is over the clinical research side, right? And I also would add that there are two types of IRBs. There's a local, we call them a local IRB, which means it's local to the healthcare facility. Certain institutions have their own institutional review boards, like the USC system in the United States has the University of Southern California would have its own independent committees. Yale would have its own IRB, and it's, Johns Hopkins, Harvard, they would have their own IRB for their clinical trials. Certain hospitals have that as well. So it's actually an IRB that is local to that institution. Then we have a central IRB that is one that provides oversight for all the other facilities that are involved in the clinical trial. And central IRBs tend to be easier to deal with because they do not pertain to a specific institution, right? And so they have general procedures, general standards that are easily accessible, and they are made easy to navigate just because that's what they do. They're institutional review boards, and so these central IRBs manage more clinical research sites. They have, I would say, a lot more oversight in terms of how clinical research studies are managed. But the local IRB specific to hospitals and universities and certain systems are a lot more stringent. They're smaller, so it takes a lot longer to gain approval. Their processes are a little bit different. So when you're dealing with a central IRB, they have as one standardized system that can be used across thousands of clinical research sites. You're using a local IRB that is very specific to that institution, okay? So ideally, we want clinical research to have a blend of both types of IRBs. Hope that's helpful. Okay, interim clinical trial study reports, the same thing like the CSR that we talked about earlier, except this is a report that is done to get intermediate results. So a report of intermediate results and the evaluation based on analysis performed during the course of a trial. You have an interim CSR that is done, evaluated, written, and that is actually documented, and then you have one that is done at the close of a clinical trial. It's just really always based on how the product is being studied, what type of analysis do they want to perform, and how that ties into the submissions to the regulatory authorities. Investigational product, by now you should know what it is, right? It's a pharmaceutical form of an active ingredient or placebo being tested or used as a reference in a clinical trial, right? So that's the reference product. We had the comparator, and now we have the reference, including a product weight with a marketing authorization when used or assembled, formulated, or packaged in a way different from the approved form, or when used for an unapproved indication, or when used to gain further information about an unapproved use. So the first part is easy, investigational product. Now, the second part of this, which talks about if they want to use it in a different form, if they want to use it as an unapproved investigation, if they want to get further information. This really ties a lot to the US and Europe. It applies to the rest of the world, but these definitions really come from the way that their laws are actually put together. So these really apply a lot more to the open label. Open labels just means everybody knows what people are getting, drug or placebo, we all know. But this tends to apply to phase 4 studies. So they're very strict laws. If I choose to study a product and I say, okay, this product can reduce migraines by 30%. And while I'm studying it, by studying it, I mean, doing clinical trials. And it's great. The product is approved. It goes to the market, and we're like, wow, in addition to helping with migraine, some people have reported that it provides them with clear skin, right? Like it gets rid of their, blemishes and pimples. So what will happen is that we'll have to go back. We say, oh, let's conduct more clinical trials. We can't just say, oh, great, well, now I'm going to start marketing it as it provides blemish. You have to take that back and conduct additional clinical trials. So I hope that is helpful. Okay, investigator, a person responsible for the conduct of the clinical trial at the trial site. If a trial is conducted by a team of individuals at the trial site, the investigator is the responsible leader of the team and may be called the principal investigator. So it also says, see also sub-investigator, and we will get to that. The principal investigator is responsible for the clinical trial. You cannot delegate your responsibility. You can delegate duties. Okay, you can say, okay, I am going to be reviewing the medical information and I'm going to have my assistant enter the data into the database, manage essential documents. You cannot say my research assistant is responsible for the trial. Just remember that. You are ultimately responsible. Should something happen, you are the one that will be responsible. Okay. Investigator or institution, same thing. It's an expression meaning the investigator or institution were required by the applicable regulatory requirements. So we can say, in some cases, we say the investigator, clinical research site, the institution, clinical research site. So it's just a play on words. And these are just further clarifications that I actually put out there for you. Just remember that. The investigator's brochure. This is the investigator's Bible. And it is very complex. It's a compilation of the clinical and non-clinical data and the investigational product that is relevant to the study of the investigational products in human subjects. So remember how I had mentioned that, before you want to submit an investigational new drug to the regulatory authorities, you need non-clinical data. You need clinical data as well to ensure that there was a valid reason as to why you want to study this product and eventually, hopefully, have it go into the main population and help patients. And so the investigator brochure will document all the clinical and the non-clinical data. I mean, if they did studies on monkeys before the project, hit the market, all the preclinical data, right? They will have it in there. I mean, it's really has a lot of medical information, clinical information, and it's very dense and very complex, and it actually uses the language of medically qualified people because it's something that the principal investigators, the medical doctors, can actually refer to, right? And that's what it is. So it's like a little sheet which says, hey, you know what? The protocol says this is how we're going to conduct this study. This is what we're going to do. The investigational brochure says, okay, principal investigators, this is a little Bible who gives you some background as to what we've been finding about this product in the past. So let's talk about the LAR, or legally acceptable representative. It's an individual or judicial or other body authorized under applicable law to consent on behalf of a prospective subject to the subject's participation in clinical trials. Self-explanatory, right? It is someone who's assigned to be a LAR. Now they could be judicial, they could just be an individual, and they basically have been appointed by that subject to sign documents on their behalf. In patients who have Alzheimer's, or they have ALS, they have certain mobility issues, they tend to have LARs. But in other cases, we have pediatric studies where a patient's legally acceptable representative will be their parent or something like that, right? So that they can actually sign the informed consent on their behalf. Monitoring. The act of overseeing the progress of a clinical trial and of ensuring that it is conducted, recorded, and reported in accordance with the protocol, SOPs, GCP, and other applicable regulatory requirements. The most common aspect of monitoring is the clinical research monitor who comes out to your facility at specific intervals and monitors, the data. They're there to ensure that you're conducting the trial. They look at the data, they look at essential documents. I mean, they help you with training. They're there, as an independent person sent by the sponsor. Other types of monitoring, you can have central monitoring where the data is looked at a central location, and then there are certain parameters that are actually assessed and questions might come out of it. And so Just think of monitoring as that act of overseeing, but it can occur in so many different ways. But as a clinical research site, or as you are ultimately responsible for the type of data that is coming from your site. Do not depend on any form of monitoring or auditing. Conduct a clinical trial to the best of your ability, according to ICH GCPs, according to the protocol. So when you do that, then whatever monitoring or auditing that is going on, there is the least amount of friction because you have your own additional oversight. So that's just a big takeaway from the monitoring aspect of clinical trials. And then the monitoring report is a written report from the monitor to the sponsor after each site visit, and or other trial related communication according to the sponsor's SOP. So that monitoring, there's reports that come out of it. The most common is the monitoring report. You as a clinical research site, you will not see that. All that documentation really pertains to the essential documents in the sponsor's database. But all monitoring reports are important when there is an inspection and when there is an audit. So those are all trial-related documents that are also assessed in conjunction with the data that is actually being analyzed. Okay, so that's it for session 4. Again, happy that you're here. Happy that you're learning. More to come, and I will see you in session 5.